Well, two things to consider. The first part is that World War II did not result in the sort of paradise like environment that you're suggesting. The Soviet Union and China were very much on the outside. They did not participate in any of the arrangements or agreements that were reached at Bretton Woods, the IMF, the World Bank, and so forth. So they stood aside. This was not a global solution by any means. And the situation around the world remained very, very tense for a long time, particularly in Central Europe, where you had the largest buildup of military power in the history of mankind. We all sat there with our guns fully loaded, pointed at each other. And we did that for almost 50 years. So I don't think you can go back to World War II and say that once it ended, we all sort of slapped each other on the back and said, well, that's okay. Now we'll get on with things. Also, remember that we're primarily a maritime and aerospace power. When we expressed an interest in freedom of navigation, even though we've never signed the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea, we've never signed it. You ought to keep that in mind. So we talk about freedom of navigation. Well, we haven't signed it, so do we really believe in it? We believe in it for
Why?
us.
Why didn't we sign it?
Well, because
Why didn't the US sign it? Sorry.
yeah, we saw ourselves emerging from the war ultimately as not completely global, but certainly close to being a global hegemon. In other words, no ship could move, no aircraft could move without us ultimately having an influence over it. What did we want to sign a convention in the UN for that would restrict us in any way? So we run these so-called freedom of navigation cruises up and down the South China Sea, which for the most part are provocations against China. All right? They're not freedom of navigation operations as popularly noted. So I guess this just set aside this notion that everything was better afterwards and things should be good now. It's not true. Again, you got a lot of blood that's being spilled, a lot of territories exchanged hands in the Bosnian War and also at the end of World War II. And we're still dealing with that in Ukraine. Now, if you look at the Middle East today and you understand that, 500 to 750,000 casualties in the war that Iran fought against Iraq after Iraq invaded Iran at with our encouragement and at the urgent plea of the Europeans, and we tried to snuff out this Khomeiniist revolution, which we equated with Bolshevism in 1918. You take that into consideration, the people that are going to sail through without probably any cost or at all for some period of time will be Russia, China, India, Japan, and I expect ultimately Korea. All of those countries have no hostile intent towards Iran, never did. In fact, they've offered their aid and assistance. They've sent in aid wherever they could beyond just military assistance. So I don't think that's surprising. Now, what about the rest of the world? Well, they're going to watch very carefully what happens on the west side of the Gulf right now. And remember, as far as they're concerned, the UAE in particular and Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, these places have been nothing but launch pads for U.S. military power to either contain or attack Iran. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're not treated very equitably for some period of time. Now, how long will that last? An awful lot depends on what sort of arrangements are made. My point, and this is an important one, is I don't see where we play a role anymore. See, the truth is, right now, we are staring strategic defeat in the eye in the Persian Gulf. Let there be no mistake about it. We have been militarily defeated. We are being forced into ignominious retreat from the region. Once it became clear to the Iranians that Iran would survive, they turned their attention to the number two objective after survival, which was and still is the expulsion of hostile American forces from the region. Now, that doesn't sit terribly well with some of our friends in the statelets of the Persian Gulf, but we've demonstrated we can't protect them, and they've reminded us of that. And they're going to face a situation very shortly where there's one of two things has to happen. Either throw the Americans out or we'll finish the job and there won't be much of you left. And I think that's where the Iranians are at this point. We have to also heed the wishes of the people that live in the region. And I think ultimately people in the region are going to say, we've had a good relationship, but it's no good anymore. You really can't protect us, and you're going to have to leave. And I think those are the preconditions for some sort of peace in the region. Now, there's a problem here, and that problem is Israel.
Israel. All right. Talking about the Gulf, CNN put out an article as we went live. According to a regional official, Gulf state leaders are concerned about shortages of air defense munitions and have acknowledged these shortages could hinder their ability to intercept Iranian missiles and UAVs, drones. Iran also reportedly told Gulf states that energy infrastructure or water desalination sites across the region would be struck if America conducts new strikes against Iran. That report was from yesterday, the second one. So two pieces of information here. Number one is, unsurprisingly, the Gulf are warning that they don't have enough interceptors. They're not ready for a new barrage by Iran. And number two, the Iranians I've talked to a lot about this in the last few days. Their rules of engagement has changed drastically to put Trump in a very difficult position. One, I think they struck the ship in Egypt. Some people say it was either a false flag or another country or unknown. But I think they struck the ship in Egypt as a warning to the Americans. They preemptively struck Jordan and Kuwait to change, as I said, the rules of engagement. The Iranians are like, hey, if you start attacking us or if you do anything, we're going to decide when it stops. So you can't start and stop whenever you want. And we have a bigger target base now. And now with this new threat that was reported yesterday, but that came in a few days ago, the Iranians are like, any strike on our territory, any, will result in strikes on the energy infrastructure and civilian infrastructure like desalination plants, as well as US bases in the Gulf. So this is Iran making it clear for Trump that either you go all in, as in gloves off, full-blown war, or you don't strike us ever again, number one. And then with the earlier report about their demands on the negotiations, they're asking for crazy fees, and they're passing a pretty crazy law. So I don't know whether the Iranians are putting Trump in a position where he literally has no choice but to do what we've discussed for months now, and just walk away, say, look, I messed up. He'll obviously say something different, but I messed up. I'm going to let the rest of the world clear it. The consequences of my fuck up will be felt for many, many years to come, if not decades, but I can't do anything about it. And I don't know whether this is what the Iranians are forcing Trump into. Maybe that leads to my next question is, with all these updates that happen and all the other news in the last few days, what's more likely now, in your opinion? A deal, Trump walking away, or back to war?
Well, I think you're asking a question that everybody wants an answer to.
Yeah, exactly.
Some people are saying, well, he's not going to go back in and
let me open Polymarket, Colonel. Let me open Polymarket before you answer. All right, go ahead.
Some people are saying, no, he's not going to attack. I heard that the last time. I've heard that so many times. Oh, no, he won't attack. He understands the ramifications. He does understand the ramifications. And he made that very clear when he was in Paris and he signed the MOU. He said, I don't want to be Herbert Hoover. And I'm not going to be responsible for the world global depression that will result if I don't open the strait. So he does understand that. But having said that, Tucker Carlson also has related that before the war started some time ago, and you've got to go back to 2023. Tucker brought me on his program. I think it was in August of 2023, up in his studio in New England. And he asked me, point blank, opening question, are we on the path to war with Iran? And I unhesitatingly said, yes. Okay. Now, some people thought I was a lunatic, and he was a little surprised that I answered so straightforwardly, but I said we were. He then subsequently reported years later, just before all of this business began in February, that he had actually gone to the Oval Office and talked to President Trump. And that in this discussion, he was very straightforward about the Iranian war probability. And he said that President Trump understood all the pitfalls all the dangers, all the problems, everything, clearly. And he walked out of the Oval Office with a feeling, well, the president does understand the dangers, the difficulties. This is not an easy operation. This is not going to be over in a few days. And it may not work out. He understands that. But he started the war anyway. Now, I think it's important to hear. He started it anyway. Now, I got a lot of people that say, well, this General Kane and others have said, Mr. President, this isn't it. It's all crap. Why? Kane was brought out of retirement as a 3-star, promoted to 4 stars for one reason: to go to war with Iran. He wanted a chairman of the Joint Chiefs who understood that's where we're headed. He may never admit that publicly, but that's the case. So everybody in the administration that signed on early as an Israel firster knew we were going to go to war with Iran. It was a question of when and how and under what circumstances. And we started all these visits from Mr. Netanyahu over and over and over and over again until finally the war broke. This is America's war on behalf of Israel for Jewish hegemony in the Middle East. And it ties back to New York City. It also is connected to Zelensky and his regime in Kiev, because many of the same billionaires that we call Zionists in the United States, who are agents for Israel, who put Trump into the White House, are also interested in the destruction of Russia. And they have been pushing war with Russia in Ukraine, using Ukrainians as cannon fodder to achieve their goals. Now, that's failed, and that's not going to change. They're now pressing for the same thing in the Persian Gulf. It is not about regime change, inspiring an open popular revolt, saving the Iranian people from this oppressive Islamic regime. That's all nonsense. This is about the destruction of Iran. That's what they want. That's why they put Trump into the White House. That's why they have gained control of the Congress. And that's what they're going to get, come hell or high water. So there are 3 doors, okay? You described 3 doors, 3 options. There's 3 doors. Door number 1 is go back. Go back and bounce rubble. Go back and attack again. Now, this time it'll be different. And you see, this is the gambler's fallacy. I've lost and lost, but I'm a winner. I can do this and I will win. I'm going to throw the dice and I'm going to risk everything and I'm going to win. That doesn't work very well. That's door number 1. That's where Trump is to some extent. He's got a foot there already in the door. Door number 2 is, I need to get out. This is a failure. It's been a big mistake. I need to cut my losses and get out. That's tough because of this group over here from Israel. And Israel's agents are saying, you can't just leave. If you leave, the world will end. The world will end. Israel will be destroyed. Will be destroyed. ICBMs with nuclear warheads will rain down on all of us all over the world. Okay. I had a similar discussion with General Dave Petraeus. He and I taught the Department of Social Sciences together. I went out to Leavenworth to give a speech in 2005. And so I met with him briefly before I went and gave my presentation. And I said, Dave, why? He said, what do you think about Iraq? I said, Dave, we ought to get out. We need to get out. Oh, no, we can't just leave. If we leave, Anbar province will become a platform for the projection of Islamist terrorism all over the world. No. I said, Dave, I think we should leave. And you know what, Dave? That's what we did when we left Vietnam. We just left. Now, my point is, that's not doable for Donald Trump because of the Israel lobby and the connections that he has there, the obligations he owes. And he may be under some form of duress. I don't know.
Yeah.
Then there's a third door that you kind of mentioned. That's where you may say, well, we'll strike a few targets and then we'll talk, and then we'll talk and we'll strike a few targets, but we'll hammer out some sort of arrangement that we can all live with. I don't see that happening because it hasn't worked in the past. In Trump's mind. And Trump has to be able to declare victory in some fashion, or he can't walk away. That's part of his problem, his Roy Cohn rules and so forth. So there are your three doors. And it's a question of, is it really door number one or door number two? Now, the good news about door number two, where you said, the hell with this, I'm out of here, is it in the United States, Mario? Nobody cares. No one's interested in the Persian Gulf.